From CNN Center in Atlanta, coverage of Election 2000 continues. Here again, Judy Woodruff, Bernard Shaw, Jeff Greenfield, and Bill Schneider.
And indeed, those polls have closed, and the First Lady of the United States of America will become a senator from New York State. Hillary Rodham Clinton tonight defeating Congressman Rick Lazio.
I think it is safe to say, folks, that we have written a new page in American political history. Not only the first Lady ever to hold public office, someone who moved to New York, a state she had never lived in, someone who in February of 1999 or January watched her husband being acquitted of impeachment charges, and on that very day huddled with Harold Ickes, one of the Clintons' top aides, and started talking about her future, which included, amazingly to some people, a United States Senate seat in New York. One other thing, she got two huge breaks. That Rudy Giuliani had to, because of health and personal reasons, not run, and she got a huge break when George Bush became the Republican nominee, taking New York virtually out of the presidential battleground and dumping no Republican help in there. But to her credit, she went upstate, Republican territory, worked for a year and a half, and she is now the United States Senator-elect from New York, and who'd have thunk it a year and a half ago.
Who'd have thunk it?
Staying here in the Empire State, CNN declares the winner, Vice President Gore, picking up New York's 33 electoral votes. Continuing with our poll closings now, Wisconsin, we're not prepared to call this yet. Wisconsin's 11 electoral votes, very, very important this night. In Minnesota, also the same case here, we are not prepared to call Minnesota. When we can, of course, we will. Louisiana, Governor Bush winning tonight there, 9 electoral votes going into his column. In Arizona, again, we're not prepared to call this one, nor are we prepared to call it in Colorado. Colorado with 8 electoral votes hanging out there. Governor Bush, CNN declares the winner in Nebraska, 5 more electoral votes for the Texas governor. We are not going to call New Mexico yet. We'll come back to New Mexico. Rhode Island put in the Gore column, the vice president winning 4 more electoral votes. In North Dakota, Governor Bush wins those 3 electoral votes. As he does in South Dakota, 3 more electoral votes. As he does in Wyoming, still 3 more electoral votes. Now, this is the map as we look at it at this hour. The vice president, 192 electoral votes. Governor Bush, 153.
Bernie, it looks like 11 states we are not able to call yet, but as you point out, the total, Al Gore inching ever closer to 270, but George Bush still within striking distance. But the big story tonight, in addition to watching how these states tally up, is how many of them are being fought out, you know, whatever term you want to use, whether it's a cliche, hand-to-hand combat or whatever, they're still fighting it out on the ground.
It also looks, when you look at that electoral map and you look at that looming West Coast that's been so kind to the Democrats for the last 8 years, that George W. Bush is going to have to win almost everything that is still in play to have a chance because of what may be looming in California. I also think we should probably pause and talk one more second about that Hillary Clinton Senate race, because it is not just another Senate race. I have a very quick story. When Eleanor Roosevelt was a widow, Harold Ickes Sr. went to her in 1945 and urged her to run for the United States Senate from New York. Said, you'll be a great tribute to your husband. Eleanor said, I can't do it. He's only been dead a month. I'm not ready to even think about it. So 54 years later, Harold Ickes' son sits with Hillary Rodham Clinton and says, if you come to New York and run for the Senate, we think you can make it. And she has.
And a prime factor has to be her husband, President Clinton, who not only whispered strategy in her ear, but campaigned tirelessly with her.
Yes, I think with this victory, Hillary Rodham Clinton instantly becomes a national figure, or she is a national figure already, but I think she becomes a national Democrat with a very wide national following. Now, if Al Gore wins the election, in a sense, you'll have 2 leading national Democrats, each of whom can claim the Clinton legacy. Al Gore, his selected vice president, and Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, his wife. If there's ever a difference of opinion between, if he's president, Al Gore, and Senator Clinton, won't that be interesting?
Frank Buckley is in New York at Clinton headquarters. What's it like, Frank?
Well, the mood jubilant here, the crowd erupting in cheers as the TV reports of Hillary Clinton being declared the winner came out on the big screen TVs, the people here in the audience cheering. And to pick up on a thread that you were just talking about, yes, Mrs. Clinton did embrace the president in campaigning later on in the campaign. Early, she did not campaign with him very much. The thinking was that they wanted her to be able to establish herself as a candidate, and once she was able to do that, and once it was clear that the people of New York knew that she was running on her own, then they felt very comfortable in bringing the president in. The president's popularity never waning here in New York, so they felt that he was a strong card to bring to the table, and he in fact helped in the final days, especially in bringing out the Democratic base here in New York.
Deborah Fayrick is over at Rick Lazio's campaign.
Well, this is what you're seeing. You're seeing a live picture of the room right now. There was stunned silence when this race was called for Hillary Clinton. No reaction from any members of the crowd who had been cheering wildly every time a state was announced for Governor Bush. No reaction whatsoever. Several people looking visibly upset. One woman left the room. Now, Lazio, we spoke to a spokesperson from his campaign not more than 10 minutes ago, and they were adamant. They said that this thing is not over yet. They were really hoping to get a very big boost from voters between 5 and 7 o'clock, a time that they had deemed sort of Republican voting time. Rick Lazio was at Grand Central Station campaigning. It does not appear to have been enough. Right now, no comment, no reaction as to whether they're going to concede or when they will concede. Rick Lazio has always considered himself the underdog in this race. He was the underdog when he first won election back in 1992 to the House, and he was really hoping to repeat that with another come-from-behind victory. Judy, Bernie?
Bill Snyder, what was persuasive among the voters?
Well, let's look at the voters of New York. To whom does Hillary Rodham Clinton owe a debt of gratitude? And the answer is whom? Women. Women voted 58% for Hillary Rodham Clinton, almost 60%. Phenomenal. Men didn't vote for her. Men voted very narrowly for Rick Lazio. And let me point out that Gore won New York by carrying both men and women, but in Hillary's case, it was women who put her over. What about the carpetbagger issue? We asked voters in New York, has she lived long enough in New York to represent New York effectively? And on the carpetbagger issue, New York voters were split. 50% said they were not concerned that she hasn't lived there long enough. Almost 50% said, yeah, it was an issue of concern. So the carpetbagger issue did not go overwhelmingly against Hillary Rodham Clinton in her effort to become senator from New York. Of course, we know the only other time when someone won a Senate race who had never lived or worked in a state was Robert Kennedy in 1964, also in New York.
This has been a real roller coaster of a race, of a campaign for this woman, you have to say. I mean, she started out, she thought she was running against Rudy Giuliani, and of course we know because of health problems he ended up dropping out. But I mean, it's been up, it's been down, it's been all over the place, and she's taken a lot.
The remarkable thing about this race was that even more than most presidential races, the passions that this race engendered in my home state were astonishing. You heard opinions about Hillary Clinton that were on the one hand, you know, this was a role model, and on the other hand were scabrous. And at first, a lot of traditional Democratic liberals, including women, were very hostile to her. They said she's coming up here because she couldn't deal with her husband. I mean, it was pretty rough, and I do think in part of it was that the Democrats came home on issues. But the other thing was she worked her head off.
Her head off.
Her head.
But how many people were neutral about Hillary Clinton this year? Everyone went into this with a strong feeling one way or another. And what you're saying is that strong feelings against were shifted.
I think, if I may, just one quick thing. I think that even the people who were undecided emotionally. They really had problems with her personally. They had problems with the relationship. And they were really had problems, if they were Democrats, with giving another Republican vote to Trent Lott. I mean, those issues, things I think helped.
That's right. I think it's fair to say that the race was about Hillary. It was not about Rick Lazio, about whom most New Yorkers did not have strong opinions. If men didn't vote for Hillary, it's because they had strong opinions about her, not because they were voting for a man.
All right, Hillary Clinton will be going to the United States Senate, and our man who's keeping an eye on the Senate and the House and the governors tonight is Wolf Blitzer. Let's go straight to you, Wolf.
Well, Judy, let's take a look at what's happening in the U.S. Senate. First of all, with this pickup in Minnesota, Mark Dayton defeating the incumbent Rod Grams. Right now, the Republican holdovers, 35. Democratic holdovers, 31. As of right now, there have been 12 Republicans who have been elected, 13 Democrats. That suggests that there's still only a few races left to go before the final outcome is determined. Let's go to some of those races that we can now call. 9 undecided Senate races, by the way, we're still waiting for. In Wisconsin, Herb Kohl, the incumbent, has defeated John Gillespie, the Republican. In Arizona, John Kyle, he had no Democratic opponent, easily winning in the Arizona re-election. In New Mexico, Jeff Bingaman, the incumbent Democrat, re-elected, defeating Bill Redmond. In Rhode Island, Lincoln Chafee, the Republican incumbent appointed, has been re-elected, defeating Bob Wagand. In North Dakota, Kent Conrad, the Democratic incumbent, he has been re-elected. In Wyoming, Senator Craig Thomas, he has been re-elected. Stuart Rothenberg, so far in all of these Senate races, including Mrs. Clinton's in New York State, they seem to be going as the polls, the final poll numbers had suggested.
I think you're right, Wolf. I think so far things have been predictable. The biggest problem for the Democrats is the defeat of Chuck Robb. If they had held on to that seat, they would have had some leeway in picking up these other Republican seats that are yet to come, Michigan and Missouri and the like. They're going to need wins in most of those states. The one race I think that's notable that you just mentioned was Rhode Island, a state that went for Al Gore for president. It was held by Lincoln Chafee. He was appointed to the seat after his father passed away. It's a Democratic state, but he held it as a Republican.
Even incumbency for a short term has its advantages. Let's take a look at some of the gubernatorial races. Governor Jeanne Shaheen has won her bid to be re-elected in New Hampshire. That was too close to call earlier in the evening. And in North Dakota, John Hoeven, the Republican, defeating Heidi Heitkamp. A lot of people had watched that race in North Dakota.
You're right. That was regarded as a toss-up. The Republican governor decided not to seek re-election. She has had medical problems. Some question whether it evokes some sympathy. But Hoeven, the Republican, in a Republican state, eked out a win.
Two ballot initiatives also we're now ready to say in Colorado, both of these statewide ballot initiatives. Colorado passed the gun control initiative that does now require background checks at gun shows. Also, Colorado passed the medical marijuana initiative that allows marijuana to be used for medical purposes in the state of Colorado.
Well, Wolf, these ballot measures give the voters a clean shot at issues. Unlike candidate races where there are lots of issues involved and there's personalities as well, these are very focused on issues.
And Stuart, we're also monitoring all of the 435 races in the House of Representatives, all up for grabs right now. About 25% of those races have been determined, and what we're seeing is so far no pickups for the Democrats or the Republicans.
Wolf, very few House races were in play this year. There haven't been any turnovers yet. It won't take very many to get the Democrats to creep up toward a majority. There is a barn burner going on in Florida's 8th Congressional District in Orlando based, a Republican open seat, where at the moment the Republican Rick Keller has a very narrow 1,000-vote advantage with over 90% of the votes cast. That's the race we're looking at right now.
And that's the seat that Bill McCollum gave up. He ran unsuccessfully for the U.S. Senate as a Republican, former House impeachment manager. Stuart Rothenberg, thank you. Back to the National Desk.
Okay, thanks very much, Wolf. An observation about Mrs. Clinton's win in New York State. It seems to me she's paraphrasing a famous line from Vice President Gore's convention acceptance speech in Los Angeles. I am my own woman, against the backdrop of her problems with her husband.
Well, when you think that it was the day her husband had such huge troubles of his own that she announced that she was striking out on her own, I think that leads you to draw that conclusion.
Yeah, a lot of people admired her. Some criticized her, of course, for sticking with her husband and standing by him in all of his ordeal. I think most of the people who voted for her were Clinton supporters, but some might have said, you know, we're going to vote for her as a statement.
I've just been told that there's already a Wire story moving, and I'm sorry I can't credit the Wire service, that there's word that Hillary Clinton will likely serve on the Senate Health, Labor, and Education Committee. That's a Senate committee that Senator Edward Kennedy has long been associated with. I think he's the ranking Democrat there.
I mean, it's a nice irony. She is her own person now. I think it's fair to say that she got where she got, A, because she was First Lady of the United States. Second, a figure who was often seen in harsh terms, especially after the health care debacle, who was seen as a figure of sympathy because of what her husband put her through. And also succeeded in New York in part because Bill Clinton that is the state where he is probably as popular, and even personally, despite everything, as any state in the country. So it's an interesting transition. She's her own person who got where she is because she was married to her husband, and then used that to go beyond that. Fascinating story. Sorry.
Very fascinating. Wherever you're watching in the United States, wherever you're watching around the world, don't go away. When we come back, we have much more to report on this election night 2000.
Coverage of Election 2000 is brought to you by America's pharmaceutical companies and Ditech.com. For expanded coverage, log on to CNN.com. America's pharmaceutical companies and Ditech.com. Home loan savings direct from the lender.
My sister and I grew up near the beach, so our lives were always kind of focused on water. My sister has one of the most devastating forms of arthritis. In fact, getting out of bed in the morning was like stepping on broken glass. Lots of pain and stiffness, swelling of her joints. Like millions of arthritis sufferers, dangerous side effects really prevented her from taking medications that would ease her pain. At my pharmaceutical company, we worked for about 8 years to discover medicines that are as effective for that pain and inflammation, but with significantly fewer side effects. To know that we're helping millions of people every day, it's a high point of my career. To know that I've helped my sister is the high point of my life.
Here now, a CNN major battleground call. Governor Bush is the winner in Ohio, and he grabs the Buckeye State's 21 electoral votes.
This is a state that he absolutely had to have, given what happened in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. It is also a state Republicans have to have because they just don't win the White House without it, especially with the loss in Illinois. And it now suggests that there is at least a little more optimism, not optimism, but at least hope on the Bush camp. That's right, hope. Because if you look at all the other states, before we get west, if Bush can win Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Wisconsin, Minnesota, if the electoral map begins to stabilize.
It's also a
CNN
state.
is making another call right now. Governor Bush moving very quickly in Tennessee, embarrassing Vice President Gore by snatching his state's 11 electoral votes.
Yes.
We wish to make a correction about something that was said earlier. I believe that Woodrow Wilson got elected president without carrying his home state of New Jersey.
The second time.
Yeah, that's the second time, in 1916.
So any of you taking notes, please jot that down on your chart. But this
And there was James Polk who won the presidency without Tennessee.
Yes, but having won Tennessee, having won the vice president's home state, this scenario for Bush now begins to look at least conceivable. You can see the Bush people saying, okay, if we take Arkansas, if we take Missouri, if we take Wisconsin, if we take Minnesota and Iowa, this is what it's come down to, then we get to the West with enough electoral votes that we can withstand a loss in California.
But
I'll tell you, friends, it becomes more and more interesting as every state is called.
I would call
It's really
Ohio.
seesaw. Look at that. It's Gore now has 192, Bush 185, according to my quick
I'd
computation.
call Ohio the Keep Hope Alive state for the George Bush campaign. And what we found in the exit poll is that one of the reasons why he won it was gun owners. A lot of gun owners. 40% of the voters in Ohio were gun owners, and they went almost 60% for George W. Bush.
We should say, too, that about Ohio, that it's been about a week and a half that Al Gore pulled his ads from that state because the polling information they were doing inside their campaign told them they really didn't have much of a shot. They pulled out a good bit of money.
And if we go back to our keys and we talk about social issues, the gun ownership issue was one that the Gore campaign thought was going to drive women away from Bush. At least in Ohio, we can at least make the speculation that working class Democrats, gun owners, had a problem with Al Gore's gun control stand. We'll find out a little later.
But Bill Clinton won that state twice. Ohio was in the Clinton camp both in 1992
that's right.
narrowly and in 1996 narrowly.
That's right. Now it's back to the Republican camp where it has been most often.
Because Bill Clinton didn't suffer on those social issues the way Al Gore might be. I think what we're trying to say again and again is that the more states that are called, the more this race takes on the fascinating perspective that we thought it would be before the polls ever opened. We don't know who the next president of the United States is going to be. We may not know for an hour and a half, 2.5 hours. Who can say?
Yep, and in Pennsylvania, in a number of these states, it was the late-breaking voters who appear to have made the difference. They clearly delivered Pennsylvania for Al Gore, which was going for Bush early on. They shifted in the last few days.
Bill, I want to, just for clarification, if we have a minute to do this, it's, what, 9:20 on the East Coast. The polls closed in Ohio almost 2 hours ago. Help us understand the process. I mean, in some of these states, just so our viewers can understand, we've been able to call the state literally the moment the polls closed. Not the case in Ohio. What had to happen in the interim for us to be able to call it?
I think what we had to do was look at some key precincts in Ohio to find out what was actually going on in the real vote, because our exit poll wasn't definitive enough to allow us to call Ohio. There was too much margin of error. So we had to look at the real votes as they started to be counted. And we have precincts selected around the state of Ohio. People call in and tell us the vote totals in those precincts, and those are real votes, and they help us look at the exit poll and see if the exit poll is giving us a strong clue. And also, if there are a number of absentee ballots out, they usually count those very quickly. We look and see how the absentee ballot count is going.
If you're just joining us, you've missed a lot, but there's still a lot more to come. This is how the electoral map looks right now at 20 minutes after 9 Eastern Time. Texas Governor George Bush is leading slimly, 185 electoral votes to Vice President Gore's 182. As I say, lots of excitement so far, but still lots more to come given the closeness of those numbers.
It is remarkable, Bernie. I mean, any which way you cut it, there's a lot to look out for there. All the states in yellow, I think it's, what, 9 states now, if you count at least a portion of the state of Maine, which we've, given 3 of its 4 electoral votes to Al Gore. We don't know, we can't say who the other one will go to. One has to assume it's got to go to either Gore or Bush, but we don't know.
Would you mind one piece of preliminary conceivable mischief to put on the table?
How about 2 pieces?
It's all right. Well, the first one is if these states break a certain way, we could wind up with a 269-269 tie with no one getting a majority of electoral votes. It is not out of the question yet. And then we'll be here till January, folks.
Right in these very chairs in this very studio. Do you think they'd feed us?
Then it will go to the House of Representatives, and it will go to the new House of Representatives, and we don't know how that's going yet.
When we come back, John Keene, Candy Crowley in Austin, Texas, and Nashville, Tennessee. We'll check in to see what they're saying and what they're thinking when we come back.
Got yourself into too much credit card debt? Why not point and click your way out of debt with a second mortgage from Ditech.com? Whether you have equity or no equity, good credit or not so good credit, Ditech has a second mortgage with absolutely no closing costs to help you lower your monthly payments now. So point and click your way out of high-interest, non-tax deductible credit card debt at Ditech.com or call us at 1-800-71-FIX.
My dad wouldn't have called this retirement. I mean, who would have...
When do I get to retire from managing my money? Now that I have
co-trustees.
7 grandkids.
Kind of funny how investing was easier when I didn't have any money.
Titanium bikes are overrated.
I always thought earning money was the hard part. Keeping it's the real job.
I wonder, should we take the income?
Should we reinvest?
Thank you, Payne Weber.
The internet goes everywhere because of us.
The internet is more reliable because of us.
The internet is growing because of us.
The internet is more exciting because of us. The internet is faster because of us.
The internet is better because of us.
Delivering the most content from the world's biggest network, Akamai.
Does everybody know what this is? A heart.
It's called the silent killer. 50 million Americans alone suffer from high blood pressure. There are no symptoms, yet high blood pressure is the primary cause of heart disease, the #1 killer of men and women in the United States. 19 years ago, the first ACE inhibitors were discovered at my pharmaceutical company, and these drugs have found tremendous potential in the treatment of high blood pressure. But there are still millions who are unable to lower their blood pressure with medication. Their elevated pressure is a time bomb waiting to go off. That's why we're developing this new medicine, and it has excellent effectiveness in treating blood pressure. Maybe by the time these kids are my age, we'll have found a way to prevent high blood pressure in everyone.
Los Welcome, viewers watching CNN's election night coverage around the world on CNN International. You are witnessing a cliffhanger as Al Gore and George Bush battle to become 43rd President of the United States. Look at the closeness of this race at 25 minutes past 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The Texas governor with 185 electoral votes. Nipping at his heels, the Vice President of the United States, Al Gore, with 182. And Judy Woodruff standing by to report on the polls that close at about 35 minutes.
And we should do some, I wouldn't call it speculation, but just look ahead. Look at this map and see what it tells us. Well, the map has disappeared, so I'll tell you. We look at this map and we see that through the Midwest, you've got these states that have yet to be called, the Midwest and the South. You've got Iowa, which hasn't closed yet. You've got Missouri, too close to call. Minnesota and Wisconsin, we can't call yet. And West Virginia with 5 electoral votes. Now, look west. By every poll number, even though the Bush people made a play for it, the Gore campaign has to be looking at the state of California with its 54 electoral votes as though they were looking at a prime sirloin about to be served to them.
And we should point out, they spent all of $100 in the state of California, while the Bush people spent something like $12 million, and the Republican committee.
But if you look at those states that have yet to be decided in the middle of the country, and just for the sake of argument, Bush takes them, and then you move west, and Bush takes those states, those sort of in the Mountain West, and Gore takes California, the speculation that we've been doing all week becomes true. States like Washington and Oregon, and maybe Nevada, and maybe New Mexico, which we can't yet call, may be the states that hold the balance of power. This is not the kind of case where in elections past we sat here really knowing that there was no way for the inevitable to be forestalled. We don't know how these states are going to break, and we may be looking still at an incredibly close contest.
And it's crazy to try to make a prediction, because we've seen that many of the states that predictably were counted in one corner were not going to be going that way this year until the very end, when all the votes were counted.
And still, the only states outstanding, aside from the races that we are not prepared to call yet, Judy, you've got 2, 4, 5 states at 10 o'clock. And then Idaho, Iowa, Montana, Nevada, Utah. Then I have California, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington. And at midnight, those 4 I just quoted are from 11 p.m. At midnight, there's just one outstanding state, Alaska.
And just 3 electoral votes.
It does seem, though, that the fears of the Bush campaign in one sense have been realized, or at least their plan B. If they were going to lose Florida and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Illinois, all of which they have lost, their argument was, okay, we can swoop up electoral votes in all those second-tier states like Missouri and Wisconsin and Minnesota. No offense to those states, they just have fewer electoral votes. That's what they're going to have to do to make this race close before you get out to the West Coast.
A lot of things have to come together. One thing that has come together tonight is for the First Lady. We called it about 27 minutes ago, and that is that she has won a Senate seat from the state of New York. And for a little reaction from somebody who's been covering the White House, let's go to John King. You're in Nashville, John, but we understand you're privy to the thinking of none other than President Clinton.
That's right, Judy. And since you last visited Nashville, we should tell you they've started the music here at what Al Gore hopes will be a victory party. Well, I was checking in on the president, actually, to see what he was doing on behalf of the vice president, and it was during a telephone conversation with Las Vegas radio station KCET to make a pitch to voters in Nevada to vote for the Vice President Gore that we called that Senate race for the First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton. The president saw that, and he told the radio station, quote, "I'm the first president in history with a wife in the Senate, and I like it." We're also told at this hour the president helping the First Lady work on her speech. He interrupted his radio calls on behalf of the Vice President to help the First Lady prepare her acceptance speech, her big historic moment tonight in New York. Back to you.
All right, John King also joining us, I think, from Austin, Texas. Candy Crowley. Candy, you're there. Thoughts from some of the folks around Governor Bush at this hour? I know you've been listening to some of what Jeff Greenfield is saying about how even though it's harder for Governor Bush to put a 270 together, it's still very possible.
Absolutely, and it's still very possible to them. Obviously, they're heartened by Ohio, but They always had Ohio in their column. They really needed that one, but it's a major boost. It was certainly a major boost to this crowd, which when they heard it, and I think you can hear them now, CNN is on a big screen, so they know when they're on TV. When Ohio was called for Bush, it was a big energizer for this crowd. It's bound to be in the Bush campaign as well. Look, I should also tell you that the Bush campaign, despite the fact that we have called both Florida and Pennsylvania for Vice President Gore, they don't believe it's over yet in those two states, just to put that in there. So they're still fighting. They also were on the phone knowing that the West Coast becomes more and more important. But I will tell you, looking at this map and putting these electoral votes together, one of the things that the Bush strategist always believed was that it might come down to places like Tennessee, like Arkansas, like Wisconsin. And in fact, in the last day of this campaign, George Bush was in Wisconsin, Iowa, Arkansas, in Tennessee, all of which now bode very heavily in terms of how this campaign is going to come out.
Candy, can I just ask you, if they're looking west, the Bush campaign, and they must be at least dealing with the possibility that California, Washington, and Oregon may all go to Gore, then they've got to be, they're just about out of states, aren't they? They have to win almost everything left out that hasn't yet been decided for them to get to 270. I mean...
Yes, except for I can tell you that they are not about to concede Oregon or Washington. Bush made a major play for both of those states. He was in California till the very end, and while that seemed like California dreaming, they do not believe that Oregon and Washington were pipe dreams. They believe they have real chances there, and as you know, Ralph Nader is a factor, so that gives them a boost as well.
Candy, you say you're suggesting that maybe there was some dreaming going on in California, but it was expensive dreaming. I mean, didn't the Republican Party spend $12 million added to another million or so on the part of the Bush campaign for California? They must have thought they had a real shot, or have a real shot. I don't want to talk in the past tense here.
I have to tell you that every time we talk to them about California, because it's been trending so Democratic over the past couple of elections, they would say, look, no, we believe we have a real shot here. Now, part of that was based on turnout. They had a very aggressive turnout effort in California. But there were also those candidates down ballot, and in California, Republicans have felt abandoned by presidential candidates in the past, and George Bush felt a real obligation to be in California until the very end for the California Republican Party. So he was there. He made a major effort there, both in monetary terms and in time terms. They always said, look, we've got a chance in California, but a lot of it had to do with the California Republican Party and all of those Republicans down ballot.
Candy Crowley, John King, thank you. We'll be back with more of our continuing coverage this election night 2000 from CNN headquarters in Atlanta and our correspondents in the field.
Log on to CNN.com for all the Election Day information you need, from the latest polls, projections, and results on demand. It's all at CNN.com.
Imagine a simpler way. Get the personal post postage meter from Pitney Bowes.
Send mail without ever going out for stamps. Just weigh, punch in the postage, and voila. Professionally metered mail and no wasted postage.
You can also add a personal message to get your mail noticed.
Postage refills by phone in 30 seconds, day or night.
Now listen up, because here's what you'll get. Besides a lot more time.
You'll get the personal post and money-saving electronic scale.
So there's no wasted postage.
For a 90-day free trial.
Free is good.
If you use at least one roll of stamps a month, this is the perfect tool for your business. Order now and get $30 in free postage. Save time and money with a personal post meter and scale.
Now watch your business grow. Hey, I look good in red.
Get a 90-day free trial plus $30 in free postage.
The personal post postage meter from Pitney Bowes. Who else?
Ann Richards, Howard Baker, and more on a special midnight edition of Larry King Live tonight on CNN.
Got yourself into too much credit card debt? Why not point and click your way out of debt with a second mortgage from ditech.com? Whether you have equity or no equity, good credit or not so good credit, Ditech has a second mortgage with absolutely no closing costs to help you lower your monthly payments now. So point and click your way out of high-interest, non-tax deductible credit card debt at ditech.com or call us at 1-800-71-FIX.
The internet is faster because of us.
The internet is more reliable because of us.
The internet is growing because of us.
The internet is more exciting because of us.
The internet goes everywhere because of us.
The internet is better because of us.
Delivering the most content from the world's biggest network, Akamai.
Chris was like my shadow. She was always there. For 3 years, she'd drive down from her job at Kraft to tutor me. My grades went way up.
For 40 years, the Philip Morris companies, including Kraft, have given to programs like Chicago's Off the Street Club, and our employees have volunteered their time to help make a difference in people's lives.
When she left to have a baby, I told her I hoped she'd have a daughter. She already did a great job helping to raise a son.
Working to make a difference, the people of Philip Morris.
25 minutes away from another set of poll closings. Let's take a look at that great big electoral map at this hour. Look at the states that have been called, those that have not been called yet. And you can see we are at about 180 some electoral votes. I think it's 185 for George W. Bush, 182 for Al Gore, at least by my last count. And let's talk to Hal Bruno now, while we're thinking about maps, about some of those states that are still outstanding that we're not able to call yet. Hal.
Judy, let's talk about 3 Midwestern battlegrounds that are absolutely crucial. Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Missouri. First of all, Wisconsin. Madison, that's where Ralph Nader is doing a lot of harm to Al Gore. He's running with about 6 or 7% of the vote there, and that should be a Democratic stronghold. Gore is doing very well in Milwaukee, and George Bush is doing good in the rest of the state like he's supposed to. But what's hurting Gore is Ralph Nader in the Madison area. Going on to Missouri. Going on to Missouri, if I can get the Madden machine to work right, okay? All right, we'll go to Minnesota. In Minnesota, Al Gore is doing very well in Minneapolis, and then he's doing surprisingly well in the Minneapolis suburbs. So it's sort of a repeat of what happened over in Philadelphia. However, up here in the Iron Range country, which should be, well, Bernie, take it away. Something's happening here.
Well, we'll come right back to you. CNN declares that Vice President Al Gore wins Minnesota. Wins Minnesota's 10 electoral votes. And you were just making the point about his voting strength in various parts of the state and surprisingly having done well outside in the suburbs.
Doing well in the Minneapolis suburbs, and Ralph Nader was not as much a factor there as he was down in Wisconsin. Now let's talk about Missouri. Missouri is a crucial state. Okay, we don't have time for Missouri, we'll do it later.
Well, we always have time for the Show Me State, but we just want to talk about some of the things behind that victory in Minnesota. But here now is the very latest count. Vice President Gore still slightly ahead of Governor Bush in the electoral vote total, 192 to 185. CNN just declaring Mr. Gore the winner in Minnesota.
And if you look at this map once again and cast your eyes out west to where everybody has expected for most of this campaign to happen in California, you begin to see that the states begin to close around the hopes of George W. Bush. There are simply fewer and fewer places where he can pick up enough votes to get to 270 unless an amazing upset happens out west.
But we should keep in mind, as Candy Crowley just told us from Austin, where she's talking to the Bush people, she said they have not entirely accepted the notion, as we and some other news organizations have called it, that Florida and Pennsylvania will end up in Al Gore's camp. She said they are still looking at absentee ballots. They are not ready to concede those 2 states yet.
And while it's clear he's running out of real estate. Why do I have the feeling that there are going to be some races contested?
Well, I think it's possible in a really, really close race. What we haven't reported, of course, are the margins in these states. You have a very good point, Bernie. If some of these states come down to a couple of thousand votes each, that's exactly what we can expect to happen. But I think here, Bill, we've been talking about how issues like the environment and guns may have hurt Al Gore in some places, but surely in the suburbs around Minneapolis, those are the kinds of issues that play pretty well.
Well, the
Yeah, that was the point Hal Bruno was just
talking
making.
about all that is Hal Bruno. Hal, let's go back to you for the rest of your explanation about Minnesota.
Yeah, it all happened so fast. Al Gore did very well within the Twin Cities, but what was surprising, as we said, is in the Minneapolis and St. Paul suburbs, he did much better than expected, and he did well up here in the Iron Range country. George Bush did fine in the rest of the state, but it was up there in the Iron Range and in those Minneapolis suburbs and the Twin Cities itself where Al Gore won it, and Nader was not the factor in Minnesota that he's been in other places.
Okay.
Well, I think it's important. I think it's important at this time to recap that we still have, as we look back at that big electoral map a minute ago, about 8 or 9 states that we are not able to give to either Al Gore or George W. Bush right now.
That's right, and Bush's, I think, last hopes remain in the West, and he's got to pull a real hat trick to pull some of those western states. Now let's take a look at how it was that Al Gore carried Minnesota. Well, you know, a third of the voters of Minnesota voted for Jesse Ventura. He won on a bare plurality. Let's take a look at how the Jesse Ventura voters went in the state of Minnesota today. And according to our exit poll, they went for Al Gore. Oh, well, I can tell you they went for Al Gore by a bare majority, 51% for Gore, 38% for Bush, 9% for Nader, the third-party candidate. So it's pretty clear to me that, you know, with Minnesota, a divided state, the Ventura vote was crucial for Al Gore, even though he did not endorse Al Gore.
Which also tells us something about George W. Bush's attempts, or lack of it, to pick up the reformer mantle of one John McCain. You'll remember that after McCain beat him badly in New Hampshire, suddenly George Bush described himself as a reformer with results. He never really stressed that point, except in terms of Social Security and education reform, but on issues like campaign finance reform, he was pretty quiet, and that may be one explanation of why the Ventura vote did not
Ventura did not endorse Bush or Gore. He said he might vote for Jerry Hagelin or a third minor party candidate, but that vote seems to have gone very heavily for Al Gore and was the key to Minnesota.
Despite the presence of Nader.
Despite the presence of Nader, that's right. The Ventura vote, a lot of it, 9% went for Ralph Nader, but clearly most of it went for Al Gore.
We should also point out that Minnesota does tend to be a very democratic state. It was in 1984, Walter Mondale, his home state, the only state that they carried.
Sure.
Dukakis carried that state. But it's interesting, Bill, you know, we've been hearing about the Dukakis notion that so many states were in play. It turns out at least Gore picked up one of them. Bernie?
Let's go to Washington. What do you suppose Mary Madeline and Mike McCurry are thinking now, being the partisans they are, as they analyze the data as we reported? Mary, to you first.
Well, I want to reiterate the competition in Florida and Pennsylvania isn't over, but as the Bush campaign looks west to the states that you've been looking at, there is a way to add 33 states up to the 270 plus. And as they went to bed, as you will, and as our exit polls seem to be suggesting, even though we're not talking about them, Bush is leading in all those states. Yes, it's threading the needle, as we say, but they see their way there, and again, are not giving up on Pennsylvania and Florida.
Michael.
You know, if you talk to the Gore campaign folks, they say the news tonight are the news. New Mexico, New Hampshire, 2 states that they really went out and tried to win as if it was a New Hampshire primary contest. They've thrown everything at those 2 states. I was not surprised to hear John King report a little bit earlier that even the president has been doing turnout calls out west. They've got a very massive mobilization effort underway right now that they think will bring it home for the vice president by the time that the evening is over. One other thought, we haven't talked about this tonight too. The closeness of this race is not generating any kind of mandate at the congressional level in either the Senate or the House for either one of the 2 presidential candidates. We have to start thinking a little bit about what kind of shape both candidates will be in to govern if they end up with a very divided electorate and a very divided Congress come next January.
Please address this question. First, you, Mary. Why do you suppose Rick Lazio lost tonight to Hillary Rodham Clinton?
Well, I think we addressed this earlier. There are 2 million more Democrats in the state of New York. He only campaigned for 5 hours. 5 months, and he didn't have the entire weight of the White House behind him. He wasn't able to bed people in the Lincoln bedroom for fundraisers. He wasn't able to use the president to drop photos out of the White House. He was at a serious disadvantage up against a formidable foe who had all of this at her back, all of these advantages of the incumbency of the White House.
Mary missed one very important fact. Hillary Clinton worked her heart out. She went all over that state, even upstate New York, where sometimes Democrats are not greeted warmly. She went and really did convince the people of New York that she wanted to be their senator, and that message sent her to the Senate tonight.
Bernie, let me make a point about this. Hillary Clinton went state shopping for a Senate seat. She has grown up in Illinois. She lived in Arkansas. She looked for a state where there was a significant Democratic registration advantage. She's no dummy, but she ran a very dull campaign, said absolutely nothing. Yes, it was methodical, but it had nothing to do with anything that she has ever done in her life or any state that she's ever lived in.
Neither of you has mentioned a person I alluded to earlier here. I happen to believe that her husband whispering strategy into her ears and campaigning with her was a major factor. Now, allow me to turn that point to the national presidential race and ask you, would this race be as close as it is between Al Gore and Governor Bush had President Clinton campaigned doggedly for and with Al Gore? Mary, you first.
Well, if Al Gore loses, then that's a distinct possibility if people continue to vote just because states are being called. The West still has to get out there and vote. Of course, that's what the Democrats will charge, but our own polls here at CNN said that 40% would be less likely to vote for the vice president if Bill Clinton was out there. I'll say again, he had to become his own man or campaign as his own man, as it were, but Bill Clinton was a drag on him with those very voters that he needed at the end, and I think he made one of the few right decisions of that otherwise badly run campaign.
I couldn't disagree more. The story tonight is turnout, momentum, mobilization. The president has been a very key part of the Democratic effort to turn out the base of the Democratic Party tonight, which loves this president. And I think if the vice president wins tonight, a very large part of the reason is because the Bill Clinton Democratic Party came home and came back to the center. We are all new Democrats now. That is the legacy that the president gave to the vice president, and that's probably why the vice president will win.
Excuse me, minority voters in urban centers and the union vote are not new Democrats. And God forbid that Al Gore does get elected. It'll be impossible for him to govern with this old liberal Democrat coalition. They are not even of this century. Those will be the groups that are responsible for why he's ahead in some of these states now and how he's going to appeal to them and still govern for the rest of the nation in some semblance of a new Democratic posture is impossible to fathom.
As referee, I'm going to step in here and say, go to your corners for a moment. And you're in Washington.
You think Mary's going to jump on the inaugural platform of Four Winds and try to drag him away?
Well, they're in Washington, and we're going to check in with our man, Wolf Blitzer, who will give us a little bit about an idea of how things look in the balance of power on the Hill right now. Wolf?
Bernie, we've been spending a lot of time talking about the Senate, sometime about the governors. We now have the first pickup in the House of Representatives. The Democrat, Brad Carson, defeating Andy Ewing. This is a seat that was given up because Representative Tom Coburn, the Republican, was retiring. A Democrat has now picked up that seat in Oklahoma. In Connecticut, look at this. Representative Sam Gadenson is trailing the Republican Robert Simmons. Gadenson, 20-year veteran in the U.S. Senate, the ranking Democrat on the House International Relations Committee. In Pennsylvania, a very close race between Melissa Hart and Terry Van Horn. The Democrat and the Republican were in a bitter battle, very close right now, still very tight. We can't call this race. Let's come back to that later, but for now, let's go back to Judy on the National Desk.
Wolf, we have some video we want to show you right now. Just a few minutes ago, Governor Bush in a Texas hotel suite with his wife, Laura. Let's listen in to some of this.
You just happened to be calling when about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Careful. Photo dogs, y'all are a little harder. Be careful.
Yeah, good. Well, call me when you hear something. Thanks. That was the governor of Pennsylvania. Well, he's not conceding anything, and I'm not either in the state of Pennsylvania. Nor are we conceding anything in Florida. I know you've had all these projections that you've been reading about, but the people are actually counting the votes. Rooney, you need to... Earlier, it's like a 40 I had a strong statement to make. And then my man Bruni's technology went down the tubes on it. This was Governor Ridge calling. Just happened to be calling when I came up, and he doesn't believe the projections. He believes there's a lot of votes still outstanding. We've had heavy turnouts in what he calls the T of Pennsylvania. We're getting the same report out of Florida as well. The networks called this thing awfully early, but the people are actually counting the votes are coming from a little different perspective. And so, pretty darn upbeat about it.
30 seconds. 3-2. Seconds.
Pardon me? Yeah. It's the first time in... Well, we're... Trying to read something else. Not at all. I don't believe some of these states that they've called, like Florida, I just don't believe that we've got enough evidence to be able to call a state. We're actually counting the votes. And as I told you, in some of these counties where we had vote total projections, we're doing better than we thought. And but I feel fine. No, it's been a close race. As I said, I guess it's a limited opponent. So it's going to be a close race one way or the other. That's the whole future. And I'm not worried about being there. It is going to be a late night, I will tell you this.
Television cameras allowed into the hotel suite there in Austin, Texas, where Governor George W. Bush watching returns with his father, former President George Bush, his mother Barbara, his wife Laura, and others in the room. And what we heard was Governor Bush on the phone with, he said, with Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge, who is saying he doesn't believe that Pennsylvania has gone for Gore, as CNN and other news organizations have called that state. He also said he's not ready to concede Florida and its 25 electoral votes. And frankly, if Jeff and Bernie and Bill, if Governor Bush is correct, that would make a huge difference. We're talking about 48 very important electoral votes that he's not conceding.
That's right. Those two states, Pennsylvania and Florida, both have Republican governors, one of whom is his brother. And I think he is still counting on those Republican governors. Tom Ridge in Pennsylvania, a very close friend of Governor Bush, and his brother in Florida, and for that matter in Michigan, he didn't mention that, but John Engler, one of his earliest supporters, all Republican governors, he's probably counting on them to deliver and to prove the networks wrong.
Yes, and Governor Ridge apparently telling Governor Bush that in the T of Pennsylvania, there's still lots of votes out.
I did hear, just quickly, Governor Bush, when he talked to reporters mid-afternoon, he said his parents were, in his words, nervous about tonight. He said, I feel confident, but they're nervous.
Well, I think if your parents were looking at you to be the first man since John Quincy Adams to succeed a father into the White House, you'd be nervous. I mean, you get nervous when your kid's in a high school play. But I think in fairness, look, these projections are not infallible. There are times when the networks have to eat a hearty portion of crow. It happened to Senator Bob Smith in New Hampshire in 1996. The networks called it for his opponent, had to bring it back. But I think, Bill, and you're the maven on this one, that generally networks do not call unless they have a pretty high degree of assurance, correct?
That is correct. We have a pretty high degree of assurance that Florida and Pennsylvania have gone for Al Gore. Bernie mentioned a second ago the T of Pennsylvania. That may be a little mysterious, but that's the largely rural area of Pennsylvania in between the Philadelphia area and the Pittsburgh area. people in Pennsylvania, you must be spent a lot of time there. They call that the T because it's sort of a T-shaped area. Very, very rural and usually heavily Republican. That's why Governor Bush says he's relying on the T, that rural Republican area, to deliver.
In both those states, Bill, in the case of Florida, where the polls closed at 7 o'clock Eastern, in Pennsylvania, where the polls closed at 8 o'clock Eastern, in neither instance did CNN, as far as we know, and that's all we know about at this point, we didn't call it at that moment. We did wait for some of those so-called key precincts from around the state to come in.
I want to make one point about this as we talk about Pennsylvania and Florida and Michigan. In American politics, finger-pointing is absolutely an Olympic sport. And you just wonder if the news continues to be not so great for Governor Bush, how many people immediately are going to be saying, you never should have gone to California, you never should have dumped those millions of dollars into that state, you should have saved them for the battlegrounds.
Well, we already heard some of that a little bit earlier tonight from, I believe it was Scott Reed we were talking to. In fact, Jeff, I think you asked him the question, you know, what are some of the second guessing going to be? And that was part of it.
That's my favorite part of the campaign. I call it recriminations. When someone loses, you can have fun for weeks with everyone blaming everyone.
You should have listened to me.
That's right. That's what they all say.
You should have listened to me.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column.
Ah.
25 very big electoral votes in the home state of the governor's brother, Jeb Bush, are hanging in the balance. This no longer is a victory for Vice President Gore. We're moving it back into the too close to call.
One order, please. Yes.
Now could we just review this again about how?
Well, I think in the fullness of time tonight we're going to have an explanation for this, but we're reporting to you what's happening.
Well, what we're being told by our executive producer, Sid Bedingfield, is that based on the information we have from Florida, we don't entirely trust all the information that we have, and I assume the VNS service, and Bill, you can explain all this, is part of that decision.
That's right. The networks and the Associated Press collaborate in supporting a research service, really, Voter News and Surveys, which does the exit polling and also collects the data from sample precincts around the country. And they're the ones who provide us with the information that allow us to call the states. We are normally very cautious. We haven't retracted. We simply said, at the moment, we're not sure of that call, so we're going to say we're not ready to confirm it at this point.
Clarify for us again, Bill, what goes into making a call?
The exit polls, which we look at the voters coming out of the polling booth all over the country, sample precincts, where we look at precincts that have been pre-selected around the state to see how they're voting compared with how they voted in the past,
for example,
including
in the state
turnout.
of Florida, there would be several
sample precincts.
Right.
Yes, number of precincts all over the state, and we take into account the absentee ballots, which are in many states counted very quickly.
Now let's
Do you like your crow well done?
Well, that's why I'd like to put on the table this fact. But to look ahead at the map, the electoral map, and votes, if you take 25 votes away from Al Gore and put it in the undecided column, and should they break for Bush, the entire calculation of the last hour and a half changes dramatically, because at that point, you know, one thing that it's tricky to remember, if you take 25 votes from one side and put it to the other, the actual shift is 50 electoral votes, and that's a big number. We're not saying that's going to happen, but this night just got even more complicated and tricky and fascinating than it has been up to now.
Candy Crowley joins us from Austin. Candy.
I think you can hear the crowd reaction to Florida being put back. Not too close to call. You also heard the governor saying, look, it's way too close to call. So that's what they've been feeling all along. Obviously, they have to be satisfied with this change back into the toss-up column.
Candy, explain again, if you will. I know you've been talking about this all today, but why is Florida such an important piece of their calculation, and Pennsylvania, for that matter, both of which the governor was challenging?
Well, first of all, Florida is one of those states that they've always said, the pundits have always said, very tough to put together an electoral map. without Florida. There was also, obviously, the family connection. I have to tell you, though, that even now, they say they can win without Florida, but they don't believe they're going to have to. Pennsylvania, obviously a major battleground state. They felt that they would get a boost with Tom Ridge. You saw the governor talking to Tom Ridge. They have been in there quite a bit. They still hold out hope for that state. We yet still are calling that for Vice President Gore, but this was one of those amazing nights. So they're obviously very energized in this crowd, and I can assure you in the Bush campaign.
Well, we knew it was going to be a little amazing. We just didn't know how amazing this night was going to be. Candy Crowley, hang on to your hat, because we don't know what's going to happen tonight. We've been saying it all night long, and we've just proven it. Could you pass the crow, Jeff?
Well, you know, listen, there's nothing more delightful, and I have to say this as a member of the press, than watching an election where you actually have to wait to see what the voters are going to do. And one of the things that has made this night so tricky is it has been 25 years since we've had an election where we had to go deep into the night and wait. In 1976, it was about 2:33 in the morning before Mississippi and Ohio gave that very close race to Jimmy Carter. And it may well be, and this is another thing that the night may prove, that many, many, many of these states are going to be decided by close margins, which is what makes the popular vote count as we get deeper into the night even more fascinating.
And one of the things adding to this is the muscle that organized labor is rolling out this night. John King, reporting from Nashville, Tennessee, said he was on the phone with the AFL-CIO's political director, who said that the union voters who had voted in Pennsylvania and other Midwestern locations